Before we begin, we want to extend our deepest condolences to the loved ones of the victims in this story. This account details the life and crimes of Luis Garavito, one of the most prolific and horrifying serial killers in modern history. We approach this topic with the utmost respect for the victims, their families, and all those affected by these heinous acts. In the picturesque yet harsh landscapes of the Andes Mountains, in a small town called Genova, Quindío, was born a child named Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos on January 25, 1957. His world, far removed from the scenic beauty, as the eldest of 7 children, Luis bore the brunt of responsibilities and hardships. His family's impoverished living conditions meant that every day was a struggle for basic necessities, a reality that many in rural Colombia knew all too well. His father, a known alcoholic, frequently unleashed his frustrations on Luis and his siblings. The beatings were harsh and frequent, leaving both physical and emotional scars. His mother, overwhelmed and detached, provided little comfort to her children. The abuses at home were compounded by external predators. Luis revealed in later confessions that he was sexually abused by local men in his early years, experiences that left deep psychological scars, contributing to his twisted perceptions of pain and power. Despite these challenges, young Luis tried to find solace outside his home. He roamed the streets and fields, often watching other children play from afar, his circumstances isolating him from normal social interactions. Education offered no escape for Luis. He attended school sporadically, dropping out by the 5th grade. The necessity to survive led him to work various odd jobs, where he was further exposed to the harsh realities of life. By his teenage years, Luis had developed a drinking problem, mirroring the destructive habits of his father. Alcohol became a means to escape his demons, but it also deepened his isolation and fueled his growing resentments against the world. Garavito's early adulthood was marked by transient movements across Colombia. He worked as a laborer, a street vendor, and occasionally as a school monitor. In each role, he remained a figure on the periphery, his true self hidden behind a mask of normalcy. But beneath this facade of an ordinary struggling man, Garavito harbored dark fantasies. These began as violent thoughts in his 20s, which he initially pushed away but later came to embrace. His mind became a breeding ground for the heinous acts he would commit in the future. His inability to form lasting relationships further estranged him from society. His volatile temper and unpredictable behavior alienated those few who ventured close, leaving him a loner, stewing in his burgeoning darkness. As Luis Garavito matured in age, so did the complexity and horror of his fantasies. By the early 1990s, he began turning these dark visions into reality. Colombia at this time was a country embroiled in civil strife, making it a breeding ground for many forms of violence. Amidst this chaos, Garavito found his prey, boys aged 6 to 16, often from disadvantaged backgrounds, whose disappearances might not trigger immediate alarm. These children, often seen but not noticed, were the invisible threads of society: street vendors, runaways, and orphans. Garavito targeted these vulnerable boys with a predator's precision. Adopting disguises that ranged from a priest to a charity worker, he crafted personas that were trustworthy and benign. These facades were meticulously designed to allay any suspicions from the communities he preyed upon. Garavito's approach was systematic. He would first befriend the children, drawing them in with promises of work, money, or food, essentials that were hard to resist for a struggling child. Once trust was established, he would lead them away from their familiar environments to secluded places, settings where no help could be found. The pretext varied, but the outcome was always the same. What awaited the boys was a nightmare. Garavito subjected them to prolonged torture, both physical and psychological. The isolation of the location ensured that their cries went unheard. The brutality of these acts was unimaginable. Garavito tied his victims up, gagged them, and inflicted severe injuries with knives and other sharp objects. The pain inflicted was both a method of control and a source of twisted gratification for him. The final act of each murder was as methodical as it was cruel. After hours of torture, Garavito would kill the boys, often by slitting their throats or stabbing them fatally. He then buried their bodies in shallow graves, meticulously covering his tracks. Investigators later found that Garavito kept trophies from his victims, personal items like watches, shoes, and ID cards. These were not just souvenirs, but part of his ritual, reliving the crimes through these mementos. The sheer scale of these atrocities began to emerge only slowly. Bodies were discovered in various stages of decomposition, each telling a silent story of horror. The discovery of these graves sent shockwaves through the local communities. The reality that a serial killer was operating in their midst was almost too terrifying to acknowledge. Fear gripped the heart of rural Colombia. Parents clung to their children a little tighter. Communities became suspicious of strangers, and the innocence of the countryside was shattered. Garavito continued his spree unchecked for nearly a decade. The lack of communication between different regional police departments allowed him to slip through the cracks repeatedly. Each new discovery of a grave led to more questions than answers. The pattern was clear, but the perpetrator remained a shadow, always one step ahead of law enforcement. The investigation was hampered by limited resources and the overwhelming challenge of tracking a killer who left few clues behind. Garavito's nomadic lifestyle made it nearly impossible to connect the dots in real time. As the 1990s wore on, the body count continued to rise. Each new victim added urgency to the hunt for the monster responsible for these heinous acts. But the breakthrough remained elusive. Garavito was careful, meticulous, and his methods were calculated to avoid detection. The families of the missing boys held on to hope, even as the weeks turned into months and the months into years. Their pain was compounded by the uncertainty and the fear that their loved ones might never come home. It was not until a chance discovery by a local farmer that the first real clue emerged, leading to a breakthrough that would eventually unravel the horrific tapestry of Garavito's crimes. The turning point in the investigation came unexpectedly. A local farmer stumbled upon a shallow grave on the outskirts of his property. The gruesome discovery prompted an immediate response from local law enforcement. As police began excavating the site, they uncovered not one, but multiple bodies, all buried hastily but methodically. The condition of the remains suggested that these crimes were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger, more sinister pattern. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, analyzing every piece of evidence. The bodies were identified as young boys, each showing signs of torture and a brutal end. The similarities in the method of killing and disposal of the bodies pointed to a single perpetrator. The investigation quickly ramped up, with multiple agencies getting involved. A special task force was formed to focus solely on these killings. The scope of the investigation expanded as reports of missing children from neighboring regions were re-examined. Garavito's method of operation became clearer with each new piece of evidence. He preyed on boys who were easy targets, who wouldn't be missed quickly, and whose absence might not cause immediate alarm. Police launched a massive manhunt, utilizing both traditional police work and more modern techniques like geographic profiling. They mapped the locations of the discovered bodies and the missing reports, trying to predict where he might strike next. Despite the increased efforts, Garavito remained elusive. His nomadic lifestyle and the vast rural areas he operated in made tracking him a daunting task. Investigators combed through hundreds of hours of interviews and witness statements. The task force focused on these sightings, correlating them with the times and locations of known abductions. A pattern emerged, showing a trail that crisscrossed through rural Colombia, each stop marked by tragedy. Simultaneously, forensic analysis of the crime scenes provided critical clues. A distinct type of knot used to tie the victims, specific brands of alcohol found at multiple scenes, and rare cigarette butts pointed to a single individual's habits and presence. With a clearer profile built, Law enforcement intensified their efforts, setting up surveillance and increasing patrols in areas identified as high risk. They distributed flyers and worked with local communities to raise awareness about the dangerous predator. The pressure finally paid off in 1999. A suspicious man was reported by locals in a small town, where he was seen interacting awkwardly with children. Police moved swiftly to detain him for questioning, not yet knowing they had their man. Under interrogation, the suspect, Luis Garavito, maintained his innocence. However, when presented with the overwhelming evidence collected, including items belonging to the victims found among his possessions, his resolve began to crumble. Garavito eventually confessed to the crimes, detailing his horrific acts with chilling detachment. He led investigators to burial sites, many previously unknown, and recounted details only the killer would know. The confessions were a grim catalogue of horrors that stunned even seasoned investigators. Garavito's arrest marked the end of one of the darkest chapters in Colombian criminal history, but also the beginning of a long journey toward justice for the victims and their families. With Garavito's arrest, the scale of his crimes began to come into full view. Families who had held onto hope for years were faced with the devastating reality of their loss. The confessions provided by Garavito were detailed and methodical. He described how he lured each victim, the methods of control and torture he employed, and how he ultimately ended their lives. Investigators were horrified by the precision with which Garavito recounted his actions. Each account was a stark reminder of the human capacity for evil. As the details emerged, the public's outrage grew. People across Colombia and the world were appalled by the brutality of the crimes and the number of young lives cruelly snatched away. Garavito's trial was a focal point of national attention. The courtroom was often packed, a silent witness to the unfolding details of numerous atrocities. Throughout the proceedings, Garavito showed little emotion. His lack of remorse and sometimes flat affect during the recounting of his crimes only added to the horror felt by all who were listening. Psychologists and criminal behavior analysts provided testimony about the nature of serial killers. The judge's sentencing reflected both the law and the overwhelming public sentiment. Garavito was to spend the rest of his life behind bars, albeit limited to a maximum of 40 years by Colombian law at that time. The sentence, while symbolically significant, was met with mixed emotions. For many, no amount of prison time could adequately punish the atrocities committed or bring back the lives lost. In the wake of the trial, there was an intensified push for legal reforms. Advocates for children's rights and criminal justice reform called for changes that would prevent such oversights and failings in the future. The story of Luis Garavito, the Beast of Colombia, is one of the most harrowing tales of human depravity we've ever had to tell. As we reflect on this story, let us not only remember the evil that was done, but also honor the memory of those who suffered. To the families and communities who continue to feel the loss, note that your loved ones are not forgotten. Our journey into the dark does not end here. We will continue to tell these stories, not to sensationalize, but to inform and to ensure that the secrets, once hidden behind closed doors, are brought into the light. Thank you for joining us on this profound journey. If you're moved by what you've heard, please consider subscribing, sharing this story with others, and joining us as we explore further. Behind every door lies a secret. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and above all, stay kind. We'll see you next time.